He's busy, Rebecca, occupied with me, actually. Try not to be so dramatic. The line goes dead, and Rebecca Locke, 8 months pregnant, collapsing in her kitchen, realizes the woman who just hung up on her isn't a stranger. She's the mistress who's been sleeping in her husband's bed while Rebecca's been bleeding out alone, and calling 911 isn't an option because in the Locke family, ambulance sirens are just dinner bells for assassins. The floor rushes up to meet her, and the last thing she thinks before everything goes black is that the man she trusted to protect her is currently being serviced by the woman who wants her dead. Welcome to Empire Stories. We advocate for a society where women are treated with dignity, respect, and fairness. We believe that when a woman is treated rightly, she becomes more confident, empowered, and productive in society. Subscribe and join a community that believes women deserve more than apologies and empty promises. They deserve transformation or departure. Your support helps us reach women who need to hear that walking away isn't giving up. It's leveling up. Another contraction ripped through her, sharper this time, and Rebecca gasped, her knees buckling. The phone clattered onto the counter as she doubled over, her vision tunneling. Not labor, not yet, but the high-risk warnings her doctor had been repeating for weeks crashed through her mind like breaking glass. Elevated blood pressure, stress-induced complications, bed rest essential, emotional stability critical. All of it impossible now. The kitchen tilted around her. The chipped Formica countertops she'd refused to let Grayson replace because she wanted their child to grow up somewhere real, not drowning in blood money luxury. The second-hand table where she'd imagined family dinners, back when she'd still believed in the fantasy of normal. The doorway to the nursery she'd been painting alone for 3 weeks while her husband vanished into his empire of violence and lies. She'd called him because terror had finally murdered her pride. The cramping, the dizziness, the feeling that something was catastrophically wrong had overridden every instinct to handle this herself, to not be the needy wife who couldn't survive one night without him. And a woman who wasn't her had answered his phone. Rebecca's hand found the counter again, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to stay upright. The voice had been smooth and satisfied, dripping with the kind of intimacy that couldn't be faked. He's busy. Not in a meeting. Not handling business. Busy. With her. With someone who had access to his phone, his attention, his body while his pregnant wife was collapsing alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt miles away from anything resembling safety. The floor rushed up to meet her as another wave of pain crashed through her abdomen. She caught herself on her forearms, her pregnant belly suspended between her trembling arms and the cold linoleum. Tears she'd been holding back for months finally broke free, hot against her face. Because this wasn't just physical agony. This was the death of the last fragile thread of faith she'd been clinging to. Grayson Locke ruled this city with calculated brutality. He could make witnesses disappear with a phone call, could shut down entire precincts with a well-placed threat, had built an empire that stretched from the docks to the penthouses. He'd once hospitalized 3 men for following her home from the grocery store, had burned a rival's warehouse to the ground for mentioning her name in a wiretapped conversation. But tonight, when she needed him to simply answer his phone, he'd been unavailable, occupied, with someone who wanted her dead. 60 floors above the city, Mila Hart stood in a bathroom that cost more than most people's houses, watching steam curl beneath the door where the shower was still running. The marble gleamed like ice under designer lighting. Gold fixtures caught her reflection as she examined herself in the mirror, crimson lips curving with cold satisfaction. The phone in her manicured hand had stopped ringing. Grayson's phone, with Rebecca wife, still glowing on the screen before it faded to black. She'd swiped to answer before the second ring could echo through the penthouse, before the man in the shower could hear it and ruin everything. His wife's voice had been pathetic, small and desperate, exactly the kind of weakness Mila had spent 6 months teaching Grayson to avoid. Please, something's wrong. Mila set the phone down on the marble counter, adjusting the emerald silk robe that whispered against her skin. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, The city sprawled beneath them like a kingdom conquered. This penthouse, this view, this man. She'd worked too hard to let some pregnant, clingy wife drag him back into domestic mediocrity. Grayson Locke was supposed to be untouchable, dangerous, free, not shackled to a woman who probably wanted him to paint nurseries and discuss baby names while his empire required his complete focus. Mila had offered him exactly what he needed. Escape without judgment, pleasure without responsibility, a place where the weight of impending fatherhood couldn't suffocate him. The shower shut off. Mila's smile sharpened. By the time Grayson emerged, phone returned to the nightstand. The desperate wife would be nothing but a missed call he'd ignore until morning. Just another problem that could wait while he chose the woman who actually understood what it meant to be with a man like him. Behind the door, Grayson Locke stepped out of the shower, water streaming down the hard planes of his chest, ink-black tattoos glistening against his skin. He reached for the towel, completely unaware that miles away, his wife was collapsing on a kitchen floor. Completely unaware that the woman in his bathroom had just signed a death warrant. Not Rebecca's, though Mila would have preferred it. Her own. The kitchen floor was colder than Rebecca expected. She'd imagined collapsing would feel dramatic, cinematic, like the heroines in movies who faint gracefully into waiting arms. Instead, it was just cold linoleum pressing against her cheek, the metallic taste of fear flooding her mouth as another contraction twisted through her abdomen like a knife. Her phone lay 3 feet away, screen dark and useless. She could see the emergency contact list she'd programmed months ago, back when she'd still believed preparation could protect her. Her doctor's number, the hospital, 911. All of them might as well have been on another planet. Rebecca dragged herself onto her side, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other reaching for the counter to pull herself up. Her vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges, but she forced herself to focus. Think. Survive. The baby needed her to survive. She couldn't call 911 because the Locke family had enemies who'd spent decades perfecting the art of surveillance. Police scanners, emergency frequencies, hospital admissions, they monitored everything, waiting for moments exactly like this. A pregnant Locke wife, alone and vulnerable, was the kind of opportunity that started wars. The kind that ended with bodies and negotiations and Grayson having to choose between saving her or saving his empire. Her father-in-law had explained it to her the week after the wedding. His weathered hands folded on the table between them like he was discussing something as mundane as grocery shopping. You call an ambulance, and before it reaches you, 3 different families will know your exact location. They'll know you're alone. They'll know Grayson isn't there to protect you. And they'll make their move. She thought it was paranoia then. Dramatic posturing from an old man who'd spent too long in a world of shadows and violence. Now, curled on her kitchen floor with her husband's mistress's voice still echoing in her ears, she understood it was simple survival. The cramping intensified, radiating from her abdomen down her legs, stealing her breath. Rebecca bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, trying not to scream, trying to stay conscious. Her doctor had warned her about this 3 days ago. Preeclampsia, dangerously elevated blood pressure. One bad spike and she could seize, could stroke out, could lose the baby or her own life in minutes. You need complete bed rest, Mrs. Locke. Zero stress. And someone with you at all times in case of emergency. She nodded, promised she'd be careful, and hadn't mentioned that her husband hadn't slept in their bed in 8 days. Hadn't mentioned the empty house, the unanswered calls, the growing certainty that Grayson's late nights weren't about business anymore. Now she knew for certain, and the knowledge might kill her faster than any medical emergency. Rebecca managed to pull herself halfway up, her arms shaking with effort, when she heard it. The sound that made her blood turn to ice despite the pain screaming through her body. The front door opened. But Grayson didn't have his key anymore. She'd taken it back 2 weeks ago during their last fight, and had changed the locks because some small, desperate part of her had wanted to force him to choose. To knock. to ask permission to enter the life he'd been systematically abandoning, which meant whoever just entered her house wasn't her husband. The footsteps in the hallway were deliberate, unhurried, and moving straight toward the kitchen where she lay collapsed and defenseless. Grayson Locke emerged from the bathroom with steam curling around his shoulders like smoke from a funeral pyre. Water droplets traced paths down his chest, following the intricate black ink that crawled from his collarbone down to his ribs. A serpent devouring a rose, the Locke family crest rendered in brutal detail. More tattoos covered his arms, his back, a roadmap of violence and legacy etched into skin that had seen more blood than most men could stomach. He reached for the towel on the heated rack, his mind already shifting to the meeting scheduled for midnight. The shipment from Rotterdam, the police captain who needed convincing, the endless machinery of his empire that never stopped demanding his attention. That's when he noticed Mila standing too close to the nightstand, her emerald robe catching the light, her expression just a fraction too calculated. Looking for something? His voice was low, neutral, but his eyes tracked the subtle way she shifted her weight, blocking his view of the table. Just admiring the view. Mila gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the city sprawled below them like conquered territory. It's beautiful from up here. Makes you forget there's a whole world down there full of people with problems. Grayson dried his hair, his gaze never leaving her. He'd built an empire on reading people, on catching the micro-expressions that separated truth from lies. And right now, Mila Hart was performing. "Move," he said simply. "Grayson, move." She stepped aside, her crimson lips curving into something that might have been a smile if it reached her eyes. Grayson walked past her, his phone exactly where he'd left it on the nightstand. Screen dark, but the placement slightly off. He'd set it face down. Now it was face up. He picked it up, thumb swiping across the screen. One missed call. Rebecca. 37 minutes ago. Something cold slithered down his spine. Instinct honed by 20 years of surviving in a world where missed signals meant death. Rebecca never called unless it was important. She'd learned early in their marriage that his work required silence, required her to be self-sufficient, to not be the kind of wife who needed constant attention. She called twice a week, scheduled, and predictable. Never spontaneously, never at night. He turned to face Mila, and she must have seen something shift in his expression because she took an involuntary step backward, her performance cracking at the edges. "Did my phone ring?" His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "I didn't hear anything." She recovered quickly, shrugging one silk-covered shoulder. "You were in the shower. Maybe you missed it." Grayson's thumb hovered over the call log. One ring. Someone had answered and disconnected in under 10 seconds. His jaw tightened as the pieces assembled themselves with brutal clarity. "You answered my wife's call. It wasn't a question." Mila's eyes flashed with something between defiance and fear. "She's always calling, Grayson. Always needing something. I thought I'd save you the—" He had her pressed against the marble wall before she could finish the sentence. One hand braced beside her head, his body radiating the kind of controlled violence that had made him legend. The tattoos on his neck flexed as he leaned in close enough that she could feel his breath. "What did you say to her?" The city lights glittered through the windows behind them, indifferent to the scene playing out 60 floors above the streets. Mila's pulse hammered visibly in her throat, her earlier confidence evaporating like the steam that had filled the bathroom minutes ago. "I told her you were busy," she whispered. "That's all. She'll call back if it's actually important." Grayson pulled back, his phone already redialing Rebecca's number as his free hand reached for his clothes. One ring. 2. 3. It went to voicemail. His wife never ignored his calls. Ever. He was dressed and moving toward the door in less than a minute, the city suddenly feeling too vast and too small all at once. Behind him, Mila called his name, but he was already gone, the penthouse door slamming with enough force to rattle the expensive art on the walls. 23 minutes across town. That's how long it would take to reach the brownstone where his pregnant wife lived in deliberate modest isolation. 23 minutes that might already be too late, because the phone was ringing again in his hand, but this time it wasn't Rebecca calling. It was his head of security. And the only reason Kane ever called at this hour was when someone was already dead. Talk! Grayson's voice cut through the phone as he stabbed the elevator button. Once, twice, 3 times, like it would make the machinery move faster. Sir, we've got a situation at the brownstone. Kane's voice was controlled, professional, but Grayson could hear the tension underneath. Motion sensors triggered. Someone breached the perimeter 7 minutes ago. The elevator doors opened and Grayson stepped inside, his reflection staring back at him from the mirrored walls. Ink-black tattoos stark against his white shirt, his face carved from stone. Who? Unknown. Could be a recon team. Could be. My wife is 8 months pregnant and alone in that house. Grayson's words came out like bullets. Get every available man to that location. Now. He disconnected before Kane could respond, his mind already calculating. 7 minutes. The brownstone was across town, 23 minutes in good traffic. The storm that had been threatening all evening was breaking now, rain starting to hammer against the building in sheets. Behind him, the elevator doors started to close, but a hand shot through, triggering the sensors. Mila slipped inside, still in that emerald robe, her expression desperate. Grayson, please let me explain. Get out. She's probably fine. You're overreacting. He moved so fast she didn't have time to flinch. His hand wrapped around her throat, not squeezing, just holding her against the elevator wall with enough pressure to make his point. The tattoos on his knuckles, the letters LCKE across his fingers, pressed against her skin like a brand. My wife called me while she was in medical distress, he said, each word precisely enunciated. You intercepted that call. You dismissed her. And now someone has breached her house while she's alone and vulnerable. Mila's eyes widened, genuine fear replacing the calculated seduction. I didn't know. If she's hurt, if something happens to my child, I will personally ensure you disappear so completely that even your dental records won't be enough to identify what's left. He released her, stepping back as the elevator reached the ground floor. You have 1 hour to be out of my city. If I ever see you again, you won't get a warning. The doors opened and Grayson was gone, leaving Mila gasping against the wall, her hand pressed to her throat where his fingers had left red marks against her pale skin. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The Maserati's engine roared to life as Grayson tore out of the underground garage, tires screaming against concrete. Rain lashed the windshield, the storm turning the streets into rivers, but he didn't slow down, couldn't slow down. Every second was another second Rebecca was alone with an intruder, another second his child was in danger. His phone rang again. Kane. We're 3 minutes out, sir. But Kane hesitated, and that hesitation made Grayson's blood run cold. Sir, we're monitoring emergency channels. There's been number 911 call from that address, which meant either Rebecca was fine or she was too incapacitated to call for help. Grayson's foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the speedometer climbing past 90 as he ran a red light, horns blaring behind him. The brownstone was 8 blocks away. 7, 6. He took the final corner too fast, the Maserati hydroplaning for a heart-stopping second before the tires caught. The brownstone appeared through the rain-streaked windshield, dark except for a single light in the kitchen window. Grayson was out of the car before it fully stopped, his Armani jacket already soaked through as he hit the front steps. The door was unlocked. Wrong, completely wrong. Rebecca always locked the door, and he crashed through it, calling her name. The house was silent except for the storm hammering the roof. Then he saw her. Rebecca lay on the kitchen floor in a spreading pool of blood, her blue nightgown soaked dark. one hand still pressed protectively over her swollen belly. Her eyes were closed, her face pale as death, and she wasn't moving. And standing over her body, blocking his path, was someone Grayson recognized. Someone who should have been in prison for the next 15 years. His brother. Don't. His brother Callum held up both hands, palms out, his prison tattoos visible on his forearms. I'm not here for trouble. Kane called me, said the house was compromised and you were across town. Grayson barely heard him. He was already on his knees beside Rebecca, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. There, weak but present, fluttering against his fingertips like a trapped bird. The blood wasn't from an injury. It was something worse. Ambulance is 2 minutes out, Callum said, his voice tight. I got here as fast as I could after Kane's call. Found her like this. She's been unconscious for at least 10 minutes. Grayson gathered his wife into his arms, careful, so careful with her swollen belly. His expensive suit soaking through with her blood. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, and he could see the bluish tint to her lips that meant oxygen deprivation. Rebecca! His voice cracked on her name. Baby, stay with me. She didn't respond, didn't even flutter her eyelids. The man who'd made governors beg, who'd built an empire on fear and calculated violence, sat on his kitchen floor cradling his unconscious wife and realized for the first time in his life what true helplessness felt like. The ambulance arrived in a chaos of lights and shouting. Paramedics swarmed the kitchen, asking questions Grayson couldn't answer. How long had she been unconscious? Was she on any medications? Did she have a history of complications? He didn't know. He didn't know any of it because he'd been 60 floors away, buried in silk sheets and lies while his wife was dying alone. Now, for hours later, Grayson Locke sat in a plastic chair in the ICU waiting area, his blood-stained Armani jacket discarded, his white shirt rust-brown and stiff. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Doctors and nurses moved past him with practiced efficiency, none of them meeting his eyes. He'd tried to follow Rebecca into the delivery ward. They'd stopped him at the door. Family only, the nurse had said, her voice sympathetic but firm. I'm her husband. Mr. Locke, your wife specifically requested that you not be allowed in her room. The doctor had appeared then, older, gray-haired, with the kind of authority that came from 30 years of saving lives. She was conscious for approximately 40 seconds in the ambulance. Those were her instructions. What would you do if the person you hurt most in the world shut you out when they needed help? Drop a comment. We want to hear your thoughts. So Grayson sat in the hallway like a criminal waiting for sentencing, watching the door to Rebecca's room from 30 feet away. Through the small window, he could see monitors, machines, the silhouette of nurses moving around her bed. But he couldn't see her, couldn't hold her hand, couldn't apologize for being the reason she'd collapsed alone on a kitchen floor. His phone buzzed. Kane with updates. Callum asking if he needed anything. Messages from associates wondering why he'd missed the midnight meeting. He ignored all of it. The doctor emerged at 6:47 a.m., his scrubs showing signs of a long night. Grayson was on his feet before the man had fully cleared the doorway. Your wife has severe preeclampsia, the doctor said without preamble. Her blood pressure spiked to stroke levels. We've stabilized her, but the only way to truly resolve this is delivery. The baby. It is 34 weeks, viable but premature. We're preparing for an emergency C-section within the hour. The doctor's gaze was steady, unflinching. Mr. Locke, I need you to understand something. Your wife's medical crisis was exacerbated by extreme emotional distress. Her charts indicate she's been under severe psychological strain for weeks. Grayson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? That the doctor was right? That he'd been systematically destroying his wife while she carried his child? She's asked that you not be present for the delivery. The words hit like a physical blow. Grayson Locke, who'd survived gang wars and federal investigations, who'd stared down the barrel of a gun at 16 and never flinched, felt something inside him crack completely. However, the doctor continued, there's a complication. We need a medical decision made in the next 10 minutes, and your wife is too sedated to consent. As her legal husband, you're the only one who can authorize the procedure. What kind of decision? The doctor's expression shifted, and Grayson knew before he spoke that the answer would change everything. The kind where you have to choose who we try to save if something goes wrong. Your wife or your child? My wife. Grayson's answer came without hesitation, without thought, as automatic as breathing. Save my wife. The doctor nodded once, already turning back toward the surgical wing. We'll do everything we can for both of them, Mr. Locke. But Grayson barely heard him. He was thinking about Rebecca's face when she'd asked him once, early in their marriage, what he'd do if it came down to a choice. He'd laughed it off, told her it would never happen, that he'd protect them both. He'd been so arrogant then, so certain his power extended everywhere. He'd been wrong about everything. The surgery took 3 hours. 3 hours of Grayson wearing a path in the ICU hallway, his blood-stained clothes drawing stares from other visitors, his phone silent in his pocket because nothing else in the world mattered except the 2 lives behind that surgical door. When the doctor finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, Grayson felt something in his chest unclench for the first time in hours. They're both stable. Your daughter is in the NICU, 4 pounds, 6 ounces, breathing on her own. Your wife came through the surgery well, but she'll need at least 2 weeks of hospital observation. A daughter. Grayson had a daughter. I want to see them. Your wife is still under anesthesia. And Mr. Locke. The doctor's expression hardened. She's already given instructions to the nursing staff. You're not permitted in her room without her explicit consent. So Grayson stood outside the NICU window instead, staring at the tiny infant in the incubator labeled Baby Girl Locke. She had Rebecca's nose, delicate and perfect, her miniature fists curled against her chest like a fighter. His daughter, his family, everything he'd almost destroyed. He pulled out his phone and made the first call. Kane, I need you to liquidate the Rotterdam operation. All of it. Silence on the other end. Then, sir, that's 40% of our import revenue. I don't care. Shut it down. Clean. No trails back to us. Grayson watched his daughter's chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance. And the harbor holdings. Sell them. Grayson, that's blood money, Kane. All of it. I want every asset that's built on violence, every dirty deal, every operation that puts a target on my family. Liquidate it. I want my daughter to inherit something that won't get her killed. Over the next 2 weeks, Grayson Locke systematically dismantled half his empire. He pulled out of weapons trafficking, sold off the gambling operations, severed ties with the Russian syndicate that had been his father's most profitable partnership. He kept only the legitimate businesses, the real estate, the restaurants, the construction contracts that operated in daylight. His associates thought he'd lost his mind. His enemies circled like sharks scenting blood in the water. Grayson didn't care. He hired a 24-hour security detail for Rebecca's hospital room, rotating shifts of men whose only job was to keep her safe. He paid her medical bills in cash, anonymously, routed through offshore accounts so she wouldn't refuse out of pride. He had her brownstone renovated from foundation to roof. New locks, surveillance system, reinforced doors. All while she was in the hospital, all without her knowledge. He never tried to see her, never sent flowers or messages. He stayed in the shadows where he belonged, watching over her from a distance, trying to earn something he knew he'd already lost. Like this video, if you believe real change means action, not just words. Let's see who's really paying attention. But on the 14th night, as Grayson sat in his usual chair at the end of the hallway, something changed. Rebecca's door opened, and a nurse emerged, walking directly toward him with an expression he couldn't read. "Mr. Locke," she said quietly, "your wife is asking for you." Grayson stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. After 2 weeks of exile, of penance, of wondering if he'd ever hear her voice again. "But sir," the nurse continued, and her tone made him freeze. "She's not asking you to come in. She's asking you to leave the hospital entirely. She says she knows you've been here, and she wants you gone." Before Grayson could respond, another figure appeared at the end of the hallway. A man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase, walking with the measured confidence of someone who delivered bad news for a living. Rebecca's divorce attorney, and he was heading straight for Grayson with papers in his hand. The attorney's name was Douglas Brennan, and he had the kind of practiced neutrality that came from 20 years of handling the city's ugliest divorces. He stopped 3 feet from Grayson, close enough to hand over the documents but far enough to maintain professional distance from a man whose reputation preceded him. "Mr. Locke." Brennan's voice was measured, careful. "I've been retained by your wife to initiate dissolution of marriage proceedings. These are preliminary custody and separation agreements." Grayson took the papers but didn't look at them. His eyes were fixed on Rebecca's closed door, where the woman he'd almost killed through neglect was asking him to disappear from her life permanently. "Tell her," his voice came out rough, damaged, "tell her I'll sign whatever she wants." Brennan's eyebrows rose fractionally. Men like Grayson Locke didn't surrender anything without a fight. "Sir, you might want to review the terms with your own attorney before." "I don't care about the terms. She wants me gone. I'm gone." Grayson looked down at the papers finally, seeing custody arrangements, financial settlements, property divisions. All of it meaningless. Just make sure she gets everything. The brownstone, the accounts, full custody. Everything. "Mr. Locke, that's extraordinarily generous, but it's not generous. It's the least I owe her." Grayson turned to leave, then stopped. "And Brennan? Make sure she knows the security detail stays. The house upgrades stay. The medical coverage stays. She doesn't have to see me to be protected." He was halfway to the elevator when his phone buzzed. An unknown number. Grayson almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Grayson." Mila's voice poured through the speaker, honey-sweet and desperate. "Please, I need to talk to you. I made a mistake. I've been calling for 2 weeks. You're still in my city." Silence. Then, smaller. "I didn't know where else to go. Everything I had was here. You said 1 hour, but I thought maybe after you calmed down." "You thought wrong." Grayson's voice went cold, empty of everything except the promise of violence. He walked past the elevators, down a service stairwell where no one could hear. "Let me explain something to you, Mila. My wife almost died because of you. My daughter was born a month early, struggling to breathe, because you decided my wife's medical emergency was an inconvenience. I didn't know it was that serious. She's always calling. She called once." The words came out like bullets. "In 8 months of marriage, she called me during off hours exactly once, because she was dying. And you hung up on her." "Grayson, please. I've spent the last 2 weeks liquidating everything I built to try to become the man my wife deserves. Do you know what that means, Mila? It means I have very little left to lose." He paused, letting that sink in. "You're still in this city because I've been distracted. That ends now. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. But if you're still within 50 miles of here by sunrise, what happened to Rebecca will look like mercy compared to what I do to you." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And Mila, don't ever use my name again. To anyone. Or I'll make sure the only people who remember you exist are the ones trying to identify your remains." He disconnected and stood in the stairwell for a long moment, his reflection staring back at him from the industrial metal door. The tattoos on his neck, the hard lines of his face. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who'd built everything on violence and was now watching it crumble because he'd forgotten what actually mattered. His phone buzzed again. Not Mila this time. Kane. The message was simple. Mila Hart just purchased a one-way ticket to Vancouver. Leaves in 3 hours. Good. One problem solved. But when Grayson returned to the ICU floor, the hallway was empty. Rebecca's door stood open, and through it he could see nurses stripping the bed, packing up equipment. His heart stopped. Where is she? He grabbed the nearest nurse's arm. Too rough. Desperate. Where's my wife? The nurse pulled free, eyes wide. She checked herself out 20 minutes ago. MA against medical advice. She and the baby left with her brother. Rebecca didn't have a brother. And she just walked out of the hospital with his daughter into the hands of someone Grayson didn't know. Someone who'd convinced her he was family. Someone who could be anyone. Someone who might be an enemy wearing a friendly face. The man claiming to be Rebecca's brother was actually her cousin Tobias. Someone Grayson had never met because Rebecca's family had cut ties with her the day she married into the Locke Empire. Grayson discovered this 47 minutes later, after Kane tracked the hospital's security footage and identified the silver-haired man who'd helped Rebecca into a sedan with the baby carrier. Not an enemy, just family that had finally chosen to show up when it mattered. Grayson stood in the parking garage where Rebecca had disappeared, holding his phone with Kane's confirmation text glowing on the screen, and realized this was what losing felt like. Complete, total, irreversible loss. His wife had rebuilt her life without him in the span of 2 weeks, found support systems that didn't include him, made plans for a future where he simply didn't exist. The brownstone was empty when he drove past it that night. Dark windows, no movement. The security system he'd installed blinking green in the darkness. She wasn't there. Wasn't anywhere he could find her. She'd vanished. 1 month passed like a slow hemorrhage. Grayson signed the divorce papers without reading them, transferred assets into accounts bearing only Rebecca's name, and watched his empire continue its controlled demolition. His associates whispered that he'd gone soft, that the legendary Grayson Locke had been broken by a woman and a baby he'd never even held. They weren't wrong, but what they didn't know was that Grayson was still watching, still protecting from the shadows. He had Kane track Rebecca's location to a modest apartment in a neighborhood far from Locke territory, somewhere she could disappear into normalcy. He paid her rent through a shell company, made sure the building had adequate security without being obvious about it, had her car serviced anonymously, ensured her medical bills from the hospital stay never reached collections. He never approached, never called, never sent messages. He just made sure she was safe. Rebecca discovered the shadow help 3 weeks after leaving the hospital. She was reviewing her bank statements, preparing to figure out how to survive on her savings while caring for a premature infant, when she noticed something odd. Her rent had been paid. Her hospital bills showed a zero balance. Her car had been repaired, brakes, oil change, new tires, without her authorization. She knew immediately who was responsible. Part of her wanted to be angry, to call him and scream that she didn't need his guilt money, his shadow penance, his attempts to buy forgiveness for what he'd done. But another part of her, the part that woke up 3 times a night to feed their daughter, that struggled with postpartum healing while living alone in a strange apartment, that part was just tired. Drop a comment and tell us. Would you accept help from someone who hurt you, even if you never wanted to see them again? We're curious what you think. So she said nothing, didn't acknowledge it. I didn't refuse it, just focused on the tiny life depending on her, on rebuilding herself into someone stronger than the woman who'd collapsed on a kitchen floor begging for help that never came. She named their daughter Iris, after Grayson's mother, the one person in his family who'd shown Rebecca kindness before cancer took her 2 years ago. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement that their daughter deserved to carry something good from both sides of her fractured heritage. Rebecca never told Grayson the name, never sent photos, never responded to the divorce attorney's messages saying that Grayson wanted visitation rights but wouldn't ask if she wasn't ready. She built her life in careful, deliberate silence, one day at a time, learning to be whole without him. But on the 31st day, as Rebecca was rocking Iris to sleep in the small nursery she'd created from donated furniture and discount store finds, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, curiosity, fate, made her swipe to accept. The voice on the other end wasn't Grayson's. It was Mila Hart, and she was calling from inside Rebecca's building. Don't hang up. Mila's voice was different now, stripped of the honey-sweet venom, replaced with something raw and desperate. Please, I'm not here to hurt you. I just need 5 minutes. Rebecca's hand tightened around the phone, her other arm instinctively wrapping around Iris, who'd finally fallen asleep after an hour of colicky crying. You're supposed to be in Vancouver. I was, for 3 weeks, but Mila's voice cracked. I need you to know what really happened that night. What I did. What it cost. I know what happened. You answered my husband's phone while I was dying and told me he was busy. Rebecca's voice was cold, controlled, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. You almost killed me and my daughter. I know, and I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to live with that. A pause. I'm in the lobby. 3rd floor, apartment 3C, right? The security guard thinks I'm your sister. I told him I was bringing you dinner. Fear spiked through Rebecca's chest. Mila knew her apartment number, knew her building, had talked her way past security. If you come near my door, I won't. I'm leaving the city tonight, for good this time. But I needed to tell you something first, face to face, because you deserve to hear it from the person who destroyed your life.
Mistress'S betrayal.
I'm coming up to your floor. I'll stand in the hallway where you can see me through the peephole. You don't have to open the door. Just listen. 5 minutes. Then I'm gone forever. Rebecca should have called the police. Should have called Grayson. Should have done anything except what she actually did, which was walk to her apartment door with Iris still sleeping in her arms and wait. 2 minutes later, a shadow appeared in the hallway. Rebecca looked through the peephole and saw Mila Hart standing 10 feet back from her door, hands visible and empty, her emerald eyes rimmed with red. She looked nothing like the confident woman from the penthouse. Her designer clothes were replaced with jeans and a plain sweater. Her hair was pulled back messily. She looked small, broken. I didn't know you were pregnant, Mila said, loud enough to carry through the door but not loud enough to wake neighbors. I mean, I knew intellectually, but I didn't let myself think about it. You were just this obstacle, this wife who had what I wanted. Rebecca said nothing, just watched through the peephole, her daughter's warm weight against her chest. When Grayson found out what I'd done, he threatened to kill me, and I believed him. I've never seen anyone look at another person the way he looked at me that night. Mila's voice dropped. But you know what the worst part was? He didn't kill me. He just made me disappear. And in Vancouver, alone with nothing, I realized I didn't just almost kill you. I killed myself. The person I thought I was. The person I wanted to be. Why are you telling me this? Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. Because you deserve to know that what I did haunts me. That I see your face every time I close my eyes. That I would give anything to take back that phone call. Mila's hands clenched into fists at her sides. And because I need you to know that Grayson loves you. Really loves you. I've spent 6 months trying to convince myself he didn't, that I could replace you, but I was lying to myself. If you've ever had to face the person who hurt you most, drop a comment. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones we need most. He liquidated half his empire for you, Mila continued. Did you know that? He walked away from everything his father built, everything that made him powerful, because he decided power meant nothing if you and your daughter weren't safe. Rebecca's throat tightened. She'd suspected the shadow help was extensive, but she hadn't realized the scale. I'm not asking you to forgive him, or me. Mila's voice broke completely. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. and that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better than the person who answered that phone. Mila turned to leave, and Rebecca watched her walk toward the stairwell, shoulders hunched, broken in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. Rebecca stood at the door for a long time after Mila disappeared, Iris sleeping peacefully against her chest, her mind churning with emotions she couldn't name. Then her phone rang again. This time it was Grayson, and his first words were, "Mila's in your building. I'm 3 minutes away. Don't open the door." But the real question wasn't about Mila anymore. The question was whether Rebecca was ready to finally face her husband after 31 days of silence. Rebecca opened the door before Grayson could knock. He stood in the hallway, chest heaving like he'd run up 6 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator. His eyes wild with the kind of fear she'd only seen once before, the night he'd found her collapsed on the kitchen floor. His gaze swept over her, then dropped to Iris sleeping in her arms, and something in his expression shattered completely. "She was here," he said, his voice rough. "Mila, did she hurt you? Did she?" She apologized. Rebecca kept her voice steady, calm, even though seeing him again after a month felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to scar. "She told me what you did, the empire you dismantled, the life you walked away from." Grayson's jaw tightened. "That wasn't for her to tell." "No. It was for you to tell. 31 days ago." Rebecca shifted Iris slightly, the baby's tiny fist curling against her chest. "But you stayed silent, stayed in the shadows, kept playing protector from a distance like that was enough. You told me to leave. The divorce papers. I told you to leave because I was dying inside that hospital room knowing the man I loved chose someone else when I needed him most." Rebecca's voice cracked, the first break in her armor. "But you know what the worst part was, Grayson? It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even almost dying. It was realizing that I'd built my entire life around being your wife. And when that fell apart, I had nothing left of myself." Grayson took a step forward, stopped himself. "Rebecca, I've spent this month finding out who I am without you. Without the lock name, without the protection, without the money. Just me and our daughter, building something real." She looked at him fully then, meeting those dangerous eyes that had once made her feel invincible. "And I discovered something important. I'm stronger than I ever knew. Strong enough to survive alone. Strong enough to raise Iris without you. I know." The words came out broken. "I know you don't need me, but I need you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of you. Someone who would never stop." Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. "I forgive you, Grayson." He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "I forgive you because carrying this anger is poison, and I won't let it contaminate our daughter's life. I forgive you because you made a mistake, and you've been trying to fix it the only way you know how." She paused, her next words deliberate and final. "But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean going back to what we were." "Then what does it mean?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "It means you get to be Iris's father. It means supervised visitation, co-parenting schedules, civil conversations about our daughter's future. It means I release you from the prison of guilt you've built for yourself." Rebecca stepped back into her apartment, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between them. "But it doesn't mean you get me back. That version of us died the night Mila answered your phone." Grayson's hand rose like he wanted to reach for her, then fell. "Can I see her? Just for a minute?" Rebecca hesitated, then carefully transferred their sleeping daughter into his arms for the first time. Grayson held Iris like she was made of glass, his tattooed hands cradling her tiny body with devastating gentleness. A tear tracked down his face, disappearing into the ink on his neck. "Her name is Iris," Rebecca said quietly. "After your mother." Something broke in Grayson's expression. Gratitude and grief tangled together in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. He held their daughter for exactly 3 minutes, memorizing every detail of her face, before carefully returning her to Rebecca's arms. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me this, for giving me her." "You'll get more," Rebecca said. "Scheduled visits, a relationship with your daughter." But Grayson, she met his eyes one last time. "This is goodbye. To us. To what we were. I hope you find peace. I hope you build something good with what's left of your empire. But I can't be part of that journey anymore." She stepped back and closed the door softly, leaving Grayson standing alone in the hallway with the ghost of his daughter's weight still in his arms. If you believe in choosing yourself even when it hurts, even when walking away is the hardest thing you'll ever do, hit that subscribe button. Only people like Mila, who put their own desires above everything else, would scroll past without subscribing. Don't be like her. Show us you stand for women who choose their own healing. Inside the apartment, Rebecca pressed her back against the door, Iris still sleeping peacefully against her chest, and let herself cry for the first time since leaving the hospital. Not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd finally gained, herself. 3 months later, Rebecca stood in a small art gallery across town, her paintings displayed on white walls under soft lighting. Iris slept in a carrier against her chest while strangers admired the work Rebecca had created during those long nights of healing. Abstract pieces that captured pain and transformation, darkness giving way to light. She'd found her voice again, found her purpose, found peace in a life built on her own terms. Grayson came to every scheduled visitation, always on time, always respectful, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. He transformed his remaining empire into something legitimate, something Iris could inherit without blood on the foundation. He sent child support that Rebecca accepted because it was for their daughter, not for her pride. They were civil, careful, forever orbiting each other like planets that had once collided and learned to maintain distance. But as Rebecca watched a stranger purchase one of her paintings, a piece titled The Silent Siren, that depicted a woman rising from ashes, she realized something profound. She didn't need Grayson Locke to complete her story. She'd written her own ending, and it was better than anything she could have imagined in that dark kitchen 31 days ago, when she'd thought the man she loved was her only hope for survival. She'd learned the truth. Her only hope had always been herself. Thank you for watching this intense journey of betrayal, forgiveness, and self-discovery. If the story moved you, drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest. And remember, the strongest choice you can make is choosing yourself. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where women find their power even in the darkest moments. We'll see you in the next one.